Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Oshkosh. I didn't get much footage, but you're about to watch Arty. Thank you for letting me use your footage of your speech, and I'll let her take over, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
I'm Arty, and I've been asked to share a story about some extreme long-distance flying I do. And so somehow I ended. Somehow I ended up leaving on June 14th, Wednesday, June 14th, and flying around the perimeter, almost the perimeter of the continental United States. And this is my track so far. And so what I'm going to do is talk with you a bit about this flight, which I made with Dennis Long, who's right there, who is also flying an Aeroprat. But I'll give you a little bit of backstory about how this came to happen. So first of all, I fly out of a little grass airstrip in Sandy, Oregon. And I've been flying for about 30 years. And I started with a Sunburst, which was a true legal ultralight, no brakes, you use your feet to stop. And then I graduated to a Maxo Drifter, which I flew for about 21 years. And it was in the Drifter that I flew from Oregon to Sun and Fun and back. The best 7 weeks of my life. I'd never say that if my husband was here, but it was a fabulous flight. Met Brad Rose on the way, stayed with him, flew with him. And then I graduated from that into a Talon, which is really a grandson of the Drifter. And then 2 years ago, I got my Aeroprat, which is the first time I have been flying in a fully enclosed tricycle gear. I felt like a wuss. I'm no longer the last 2 years and what I've been making the flight in. Now, if you ask me, why am I doing this, I really couldn't tell you. There's a Sumont kid who wrote the book, The Secret Life of Bees, writes, there must be a place inside of us where dreams go to hide and emerge when the time is right. And I think for me, this flight sort of fits that picture. I didn't really know that I'd been thinking about it. And when I started talking about it, friends said to me, oh yeah, you've been talking about flying around the United States for a long time. I said, I have? Wasn't even aware of it. And so what happened was, as I started talking about it to folks, and Dennis, who's a longtime friend of mine, and when he heard, he heard about it, he said, "Oh, I'll meet up with you when you come through, the South, maybe Alabama or something." And I said, "Great," because Dennis is out of Searcy, Arkansas. And then a few days later, we're talking, and he says, "Maybe I'll meet up with you somewhere in Texas." Great, fine. Well, then it was California, and then he says, "I'm just going to fly to Oregon and fly the whole flight with you." And so that's how Dennis and I ended up flying this far around the United States, and intend to finish the flight after we leave here in Oshkosh. So as I'm talking, I want you to feel really comfortable in just asking any questions at all, okay? Don't wait till the very end. If you've got questions as I go, just, let me know.
And I'm only here to make sure her tall tale's not better than my tall tail.
And if you have questions about the Aeroprat, even though I brought a few brochures, Dennis is the person to talk to because he knows everything there is to know about the Aeroprat, which was darn lucky for me. So, start out talking about flight planning and preparation. So I tend to use a whole bunch of paper when I do my flight planning because I do tend to follow roads. Now what's interesting about this flight is that because I'm flying with Dennis, he tends to fly a GPS line. And I still remember when I bought this Aeroprat, I picked it up in Columbus, Ohio, and the prior owner was going to give me some transition training. And when Dennis found out I bought it, he said, I think I'll fly up to Ohio and fly back with you. And I said, wow, wonderful, great. Well, the night before we left, I said to him, what kind of, I haven't heard any talk yet about talking. He said, oh, he said, we're gonna go west. And I said, well, yeah, I know Oregon is west of Ohio, but I mean flight plan. He said, we'll go west. So Dennis flies a GPS line, not rigid, but pretty much a GPS line. I've never done any flying except following roads. So that was quite a change for me. And I'm still realizing I like flying roads, but what I do when I plan is I start out with road maps, and I actually did it with this flight as well. So I'll take first a continental road map, then I'll do a southeastern or northwestern road map, and I start looking for what seems to be the best way to go. And then after I have kind of decided, okay, like I'm going to follow Interstate 10 across the southern U.S., then I get out a sectional. And the reason I like sectionals is that you can see so much. Even though in the air I'm using a tablet with a GPS on it, you can't see enough for me in a tablet. So I like being able to spread it out. I like being able to link them up, and then I'm able to see pretty much what route looks best to me. I still avoid towered airports. And Dennis does too. I avoid flight following. I avoid congested areas. So all of that I'm taking into account when I'm looking at which direction I'm going. After I have a sense of my route, then what I do is I put out to different aviation groups that I'm a member of, online. I'll say, here's a route I'm thinking about. What's your thoughts about this? And then I get back information. I get amazing information from folks. Let's see. I got back pages, sometimes real pages of detailed information from people. Tony Ballstead, for this flight, who's down in Brownsville, Texas, sent me charts, Excel spreadsheets for his route that he had made from Tampa to Brownsville. He said, you're doing this, doing this. So you can get an amazing amount of information from folks. What I do, though, is ask myself, I don't just take the advice willy-nilly, because sometimes people give you advice that they've never flown around. They live in the area and they say, oh, you can go this way or you can go that way. Or they're GA pilots and they're flying at 10,000 feet or 12,000 feet from the time, they climb to altitude. So they're not flying the way that I'm going to be flying. So I have to kind of decide, does the advice giver really fly the way enough similarly to an ultralight? Because even though I'm flying an aircraft, I'm still flying, as though I fly an ultralight, are they flying similarly enough that their advice is good advice? And so, after I've got a route sort of picked out, then I have to ask myself, is my plane ready? Oh, and I will tell you, I spent probably 20-some hours looking at the flight, at the route. Dennis had sent me a sky vector route, and so I went and looked at each one, and I'm looking and going, what? So there were some that were on islands, and it's like, Dennis, what are you thinking? But he flies differently. He's much more risk tolerant than I am, and so what to him is no big deal. I still don't really trust my engine. I should. It's a 912 ULS, but deep inside it's like, no, I'm not supposed to be flying where I can't see a place to land. And we flew a lot of places where I didn't see places to land.
I hate that.
Pardon?
I hate that.
I do too. It makes my stomach hurt. It makes my stomach really hurt. So, so you're doing everything you can. And in my case, before this flight, I asked my mechanic, because I don't do my own mechanical work. I would never trust any plane that I ever touch. So I asked my mechanic to do a full, complete, and the equivalent of an annual, even though my annual wasn't due. I asked him to do a complete one, testing every single possible thing. And I admit, I said to him, my life's in your hands. So you know, everything's ready. Checking things like tire tread. And I mean, it seems like a real minor detail, but I don't want to get a flat when I'm out in the middle of nowhere. Checking the prop, is there any nicks? Is there anything going on? Checking each cable, everything there is that might possibly be a problem. Because while I used to think I would do in the field repair, the truth is that if you get into real trouble, that's not a really good backup solution. So then my question is, what should I take with me? Now, when I was flying the drifter, I had all this stuff strapped on the back. So I had to make sure I had the right straps, the right lengths, the right Tupperware containers. Now with the aircraft, all of that is hidden, but I still have to figure out everything I really need to take. And it was interesting when Tony was sending me all this information about the Tampa to Brownsville, Texas leg. He sent me two lists. One list was everything that he had taken with him, and it was 2 pages. Then he sent me a list of everything he'd actually used, and it was half a page. So, and when I asked Dennis about what should I take with me, he had like 5 tools that he takes. Is it five, 6 tools? And I went, oh, okay, so I don't have to take all this heavy, you know, all these wrenches and all these nuts and all these bolts and, you know, all of that stuff. So I no longer am weighed down like that. I have room to buy a mug here in Oshkosh, and to buy a mug at Kitty Hawk. So the question about what to take with you is tools, a few, but not very many. And then of course my aircraft stuff, things like
Oil.
Yeah. Oh, so I only was able to take, thank you. I was only able to take 4 quarts of oil. And I changed the oil because I'm using avgas almost all the time. I think we've been able to find MoGas, but twice in this whole flight. And so I knew I wasn't gonna have enough oil, but you know, you figure, okay, you can buy that along the way. And I did bring oil filters, because with avgas, you change your oil on the 912 every 50 hours. And I was thinking, 50 hours, that's not much time at all. So I've already changed, we both changed the oil twice since we've been en route. And just, you know, other stuff.
I'll add a little bit to that.
Pardon?
You can buy all this stuff along your route. Tools, which the mechanic's gonna have other than a few specialized stuff. And when you land any kind of issue, everybody's willing to help. So it's not like you gotta take the whole kitchen sink with you.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, we found that out, landed at Schoolcraft, Michigan. Is that where the airport is? The last one that you left and went back to Alabama from, is that Michigan?
Oh, that was up in the upper peninsula,
Yeah.
Microsoft or something.
But anyway, so I run out of Declan, because I brought Declan because you add that, or I believe that you add that when you're using avgas. And they run out of that. I couldn't get the pump. The pump was locked, and I couldn't get that open. And there was a woman, and she came over, and she is a Challenger CFI. She had Declan. She had the aero shell that I use for oil. So yeah, you're absolutely right. You can buy or find that stuff along the way. So, you know, clothes, toiletries, emergency signaling device. So I have both an ELT, the required ELT, and I also have a spot tracker, which is, people familiar with that? I'm seeing some heads nodding. And so I figured that's also an emergency signaling device. And then my emergency food is crackers, peanut butter, raisins, and M&Ms. And water, of course. And I figure I can last on that for quite a while until I can find a place to eat. And then just, miscellaneous stuff. For me, it's, I need a book to read in the evening, flashlights, that kind of stuff.
Arty, when you landed, did you use like courtesy cars to get to a place to eat or something like that?
So we used courtesy cars. There were times that folks drove us. As a matter of fact, once we were planning on camping the whole way, except, maybe every 5 to 6 days staying in a motel. Well, the only problem with that was we were in the heat dome. And it was so hot that the idea of being in a tent at night was just like, no, we don't want to do that. So we did stay in motels. And once the owner or the manager of the hotel came out to the airport to get us, closed the motel, closed the front desk, came out to the airport to get us, and drove us back the next morning because we didn't have any way to get there. Then also, Dennis uses Uber or Lyft, so there were times that I've never done that. My smartphone is still smarter than I am, so I haven't ever done that. So we could use Uber or Lyft. Then,
And we tried for the courtesy cars, just a lot of places didn't have where they're already out.
right, exactly. So once you're on your way, I really believe that the most important thing that you have in your favor is flexibility. And it was interesting because I had a fellow that I know who used to fly, and I had met him once, and we've been sort of in sporadic touch, and he got all excited about doing this flight with us. And I said, you haven't flown for 7 years. Oh, he says, I'm buying a plane. I'm buying a plane. And I said, and when you were flying, you were doing just local flying. You've never even done an overnight flight. He goes, oh, that doesn't matter. It's just one leg after another. And I've done lots and lots of legs. It's true they're all been local, but it's just one leg after another. And the truth is, if you're flying really long distances in completely unknown territory, it's a little bit more than that. And so I had to just gently say to him, it's just not going to work out. Because there were many times where we had agreed on a route, and then weather or terrain or something caused us literally in the air to say, we're going a different way, or we're changing direction, or we're going to land, or whatever. So I really believe that's the biggest. Now, with me and Dennis, what we agreed upon before we ever left, because our risk tolerances and our personal minimums are so different, we had agreed that there would be times we wouldn't be flying together. And it actually, I went back and looked at my log, it actually happened the very first day, because we wanted to leave Sandy River, which is about 2 hours inland, if you're driving from the coast. And Dennis really wanted to fly the Oregon coast, and I love flying the Oregon coast. So that's what we were going to do. Well, got up in the morning, looked at the weather, clouds were down, it was minimal VFR, and I said, I don't fly MVFR, I just don't do that. And Dennis said, I really want to fly the coast. And I looked at Cape Blanco, which is the windiest spot in Oregon on the coast, was gusting to, what was it, 35 or something?
Something like that.
Yeah, and even though we weren't planning on landing there, you never know, right? So I just said to Dennis, I'm going to take an inland route. He said, okay, I'll meet you down in Southern Oregon. He took the coast route, I took an inland route, and 5 hours later, we met down in Southern Oregon. And that happened a number of times where I just didn't feel comfortable. Dennis sees holes, and he says, look, there's holes. And I go, I don't do holes. Or he'll say, we can get under that. And I look at the cloud base and I go, I don't go under that. So we just have, like I said, very different tolerances. And there were times in the air where I would say, I'm going this way instead of the way we agreed on. And then we meet up sometimes that evening, sometimes the next day. And that worked really, really well. I've flown with guys who would pressure me, who would say, oh, come on, we can do this. Oh, come on, it's not that big a deal. Oh, come on. And he never did. To his credit, he just said, okay, see you, you know, the next stop, or see you tomorrow morning, or whatever.
What you'll find, guys, if you're in the same airplane, it becomes a little bit more critical. Because different pilots are gonna have different opinions on go, no go. You gotta agree before you start, even if you're so, oh my God, I can easily do that, I've done it 100 times. If the guy says, no, I don't feel comfortable, you go by whoever's the most. Now, it takes time, it takes patience, things like that, but it's just one of those, you've gotta make those pilot decisions. We're separate airplanes, everybody plans. I've had a lot of trips, guys say, oh, I'll just follow you. No, that don't work. Because 2 miles away, you'll never see me again. So plan your flight, we get separated, you fly your plan, I'll fly mine changes daily or hourly. But that way, neither one of us imposes our pilot limits or whatever on the other one.
I will say though, Dennis flew, as I said, with me in the aircraft from Ohio, and there I used his risk tolerance level. So when we flew over the Rockies, I have to tell you, I didn't see a single road. We flew from Cody, Wyoming, over into Yellowstone, and my stomach was so hurting, I could hardly stand it. And Dennis is going, it's fine, and the engine is going fine, and we're going up and up and up, and I'm looking at nothing but snow and ice and rock and trees. And when we finally crested, and I saw Yellowstone Valley, I said to him, it's your plane. I can't fly for another second. I'm so stressed and so exhausted from the stress that I just can't fly anymore. It's your plane. So he was in the right seat. He took over and flew us when we were in the valley. So there are times, in my case, where I trusted his judgment because he knows that aircraft inside and out. If it wasn't for that, and he's also done that route many times. So let's take a look at once we're in the air, sort of the good, the bad. Ugly. And of course, the good is everything you get to see. And I'm assuming that you're either pilots or have flown with pilots, and it's amazing, right? So this is the Oregon coast, desert, lots of coastline. We covered so many different areas that trying to find which pictures to show. These are rice fields in Louisiana. Anyone want to guess what this is?
And folks, even if you're in inhospitable terrain, my view is there's always some place to land. It may not be a good one, but there's always some place to land.
Well, he and I have very different opinions on that. But anyone want to guess what this is?
The trees are
RV factory.
What this is, these are FEMA trailers from Katrina that they weren't able to use because of the asbestos.
What?
Yep. Yep, let me go back to that. They weren't able to use them. They brought them all in for Katrina after the huge, incredible storm, and they were never able to use them because they discovered they were full of asbestos. That's low bidder kind of information, right? We did a lot of flying coastline. We flew San Pedro Island, we flew the Intercontinental Waterway, just tons and tons of flying coastline. This is interesting, it's an optical illusion. It's actually completely flat ground that's been plowed up and ready for planting. But doesn't it look as though it's, it's pretty amazing. And we flew over lots and lots of desert. I have to tell you, when Randy, the fellow with whom I was going to fly this route, when he, for very good reason, had to call me and say, I can't make it, I thought, and this was before Dennis had said he wanted to fly it with me, I thought, I'll just do this by myself. Talk about a really stupid decision that I'm glad I didn't have to carry out. Because flying over the desert was, for me, really, really stressful. There's just not many places you could fly, and you could probably land, but whether or not they'd find you before that you died of dehydration because it was so hot, I don't know.
I was coyotes, they'd take care of that.
But so this was outside of Tucson, where in Arizona, where there's a graveyard, the plain graveyard, and we had a lot of haze. You could see really well to the right, really well to the left, really well below you. But boy, seeing right ahead, it was like 4-6 miles. It was legal, but it was not good. Because I like to pick out a waypoint and head towards it, and then pick out another waypoint and head towards that. You know, keeping my magenta line in mind, but not using the magenta line 100%. And I couldn't do that. You couldn't see any waypoints ahead of you. We saw lots of, this was the FBO. It was so funny when I called ahead to ask if we would be able to sleep in the FBO, and the guy kept referring to it as the terminal. And I'm picturing this big terminal, and he's, oh yeah, you can sleep in the terminal, and it's fine. And it was a really, other than the fact that it was air conditioned, it was not at all my definition of terminal. The other thing that worried me, this is in Bisbee, Arizona, and we were flying to a towered airport, one of the few that we purposely decided to fly into, because we have mutual friends that live in that area. In, what is it, not Santa Luisa?
Sierra Vista.
Sierra Vista, thank you. But there's a towered airport, and it's a military airport plus a little civilian area that you can land. And as we're calling, we can't reach the tower. We're calling and calling and can't reach the tower. So we decided we're going to divert to Bisbee, which is only like 30 miles away, land there and phone the tower because we just couldn't reach them. Well, when we get to Bisbee, and what we find out is that it's Juneteenth. It's a federal holiday, so the tower was closed, so we didn't have to worry about it. But I was worried. Bisbee is really close to the Mexican border, and I was thinking, oh no, what if I inadvertently get into Mexico? I was really, really worried about that until we saw this wall. I mean, a gigantic black wall. And I was like, okay, I don't have to worry about going into Mexico's airspace inadvertently. I know exactly where that airspace is. And there's just the neat stuff that you see. This is in Texas, and I just was intrigued by the off-ramps and how they do it there. It's just, I just found it really fascinating. And then of course there's flying the islands, and seeing these isolated houses, that people that live out in the middle of this island and quite far. We also saw a lot of houses, people on the islands. And lots of water, as soon as we got, actually from Louisiana on, lots and lots of water. I just didn't have a concept of how many lakes, ponds, rivers, there were in this country. Just didn't have any idea. Now, here again, where our risk tolerance really differs. Now, I fly over the Columbia River a lot. I have to if I'm going to go anywhere north. And I'm used to flying over the Columbia, and it's not a problem. But the Columbia's, where I usually cross, is only about, maybe 3/4 of a mile across. And yeah, it's true, I'm only doing 1,700 feet because I have to stay below some airspace. But the truth is, it's not that big a deal. Well, we were doing a lot of island hopping. And so one place we really wanted to go was to Kitty Hawk, of course. But the thing was, it was, close to 5 miles to do the most direct from the mainland over, was about 5 miles. And that was just like, no. For me, that's just too much. And so instead, what I did was I looked at the sectional, and I literally was saying, okay, where is the shortest way across? And the shortest way across was to go to Bois Blanc Island, and then from Bois Blanc to a different island, and then from there to the island that Kitty Hawk is on. And so you can see, looks like I've got a little arrow. Okay, so there's Bois Blanc Island, right there. And so I hopped across to that, and then from there went across another island, and then finally went to Kitty Hawk. So, and that still was a little stretching a little more than I liked, but I said, okay, I'm gonna do this. And yes,
What state is this?
Kitty Hawk is in
North Carolina.
North Carolina. Yeah, North Carolina. Yeah, and I have to say, flying there and landing there, well, Kitty Hawk's runway, and I think I've got a picture of it in a little bit, is in trees. In other words, there are trees on both sides. And I am circling the monument, and I can't find the dang runway. And I was so embarrassed. I'm hearing all these people calling in. I'm looking for planes because I thought, okay, I'll see a plane going, landing, and I'll follow them in. Could not find the dang runway. I must have circled for 5 to 8 minutes looking for the runway before I found it.
We were wondering what happened to her, 'cause I'm on the ground waiting, she should be here 10 minutes ago.
He knew I was right behind him, and I just couldn't find the runway. And then, of course, there's being able to fly over clouds. And the other thing that's really neat is, do you remember when we flew into Mike Basco's place in Loxie, Alabama? And by golly, Mike is still there, still flying his storage.
And he still has that storage.
He still has that storage, and invited Dennis and I in again, and just as he had invited us to stay in his hangar when we were there 14 years ago, he invited us in again. His runway is the most like a golf course of any place I have ever landed. And a picture I didn't include is he's got 4 of these giant mowers, and he and his 3 grandsons are out there mowing every week, and he says it takes the 4 of them 5 hours with these big mowers to mow the whole thing. I mean, it's impeccable. It's just great. And the other thing that's always surprising to me is seeing people who live out in the middle of nowhere. This is a residential airstrip out in Arizona. And I mean, really? It's just nothing I would ever want to live in. And the other thing is, you never know what you're going to encounter when you're flying cross country. So this landed at, this is a fellow who has, he raises exotic animals for zoos and stuff like that, and offered to sell me this camel. And my husband said, absolutely not, are you crazy? And he said, the guy told me, he said, but this camel goes into like St. Jude's Hospital to the wards for the kids. I said, come on, a camel? He said, yeah, and also he uses it backpacking on the trekked, not the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail. He trekked it from Mexico up to Canada with this camel. And he said, you would not believe the way people looked at him when they come across him on the trail. The other thing, you were talking about courtesy cars. Sometimes there's no courtesy car, but I remember once stopping in the San Juan Islands, and we were in the hangar and asked if there was a courtesy car, and the guy said, no, but you can use my car. And he gives us the keys, and he says it's parked right outside. We go out and we see this Corvette, that's the only car we see. So we go back inside and we say, we're not seeing your car. What do you mean, it's not there? I said, well, there's a Corvette. Oh, he said, yeah, that's my car. So then it was, you drive. No, you drive. No, I'm not going to drive. You drive. And then I also got to be a chicken once. I flew into Brian's Ranch, which is in Southern California, and they have a chicken drop, and they had a chicken costume, and they said to me, the kid that usually wears the costume didn't show up, and they said, you're about his size. Would you be the chicken? And so I was a chicken. So I said the good, the bad, the ugly. So the bad and the ugly. For me, it's weather. That's what's most often the ugly, because I don't like bad weather. I like clear skies, calm winds. I mean, who doesn't, right? However, what I will say is that my tolerance for turbulence has really grown. as the more I fly, the more my tolerance grows. And so I measured turbulence in the air by two things. Am I able to maintain straight and level just using my wrist action, or do I need from the elbow action? And we did not have very much bad weather. It was amazing. We got weathered in, I think, 2 or 3 afternoons, and then the thunderstorm would pass and we'd be able to continue on. But for the most part, we did not have terrible weather. One thing I did learn from Dennis is that you can, the way I've always flown is you see a cell like this ahead, you land, and you wait. Well, Dennis says, no, sometimes you can look at the radar and you can look at the cell, you can see what direction it's flying or it's going, and you can get around behind it. And we did that with this cell. It was heading east, we went around to the west, we went behind it, and I was like, holy Toledo, this is pretty cool. Doesn't always work, that it's, you can get behind it, but for me that was really cool.
And it was kind of hazy, maybe a little smoke, and behind the ring where the wind had gone, it washed the air cloud.
Yeah, but that's for me was the biggest stressor of this flight was the haze. I just really didn't like it because, again, like I said, I can only see 4 or 6 miles ahead of me, and I just didn't like it. I didn't feel unsafe, but I just didn't like it. And then there's also the terrain, and I realized flying over desert, and especially mountains in the desert, is for me, I just don't like it. The other thing that happened that I completely forgotten about when we were flying back from Ohio, we were mostly flying anywhere, depending on the terrain, sometimes as low as 200 feet, sometimes up at 5,000. But for the most part, we weren't flying super high until we got to the Rockies. And then as we're climbing, I started to hear what I call a knock. That's exactly what it sounded like, just. And it would last just like that, and then maybe 3 seconds later, I hear that knock again, and I'm going, oh my gosh, what is this? And Dennis said not to worry, so I trusted his judgment. He knows the plane, he knows the engine. But I remember when I got home from Ohio, the first thing I did was ask my mechanic to just rip apart the engine and find out what the heck that was. And he wasn't able to find anything. And I frankly had forgotten that because when I'm flying for the last 2 years, I've never really gotten above about 7,500 feet. Well, we're going over the mountains in Tucson, we're going up to 9,800, and there's that damn knock again. And it's like, oh no, I completely forgotten about it because for 2 years it never happened. So I started getting panicky again and looking, and so as it happened, we finally were able to find someone. I had lots of different people diagnosing it, and when we landed in Mississippi at Mississippi Light Sport with Ronnie and Maurice Smith, they were able to find it immediately. They took off the cowling. Maurice says, oh, look at this. Your originator disc is 180 degrees turned the wrong way. Turned it back the right way, and the knock is gone. And it has to do with, when you're at really high altitudes, the carbs are trying, one is set correctly, but the other one isn't, and it's trying to deal with the enrichment, and it just was having difficulty. So it's a minor form of vapor loss.
What was the instrument or the?
So it's an enrichment valve or enrichment disc. And and he just took one look. He said, oh, it's supposed to be turned around this way. But that was, so as it happened, because we were in Tucson when I first heard it, and I didn't get it really diagnosed until Alabama, or Mississippi, excuse me. So at that point I said, I'm just not going to go above 7,500 feet. And when we were trying to get around El Paso's airspace, they wanted us to be up at, 8,500, I think? And Dennis called in for flight following. Because getting around El Paso's airspace is really tricky because of restricted areas, because of El Paso's airspace. And so we wanted flight following. Well, when they said go to 85, I said to Dennis, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. And he said, she's struggling to get to that. And they said, well, then we can't can't have her on flight following because we can't see her. As it happened, and I just said to myself, I'll follow you. You know, I'll just stay right behind you. As it happened, we found out later they were able to see us, but legally they couldn't say that they were doing flight following. So just miles and miles and miles of desert, from all the way from Southern California, all the way across into West Texas. And then became the other, for me, bad. I hate turbines. I really, really hate flying near wind farms.
Don't we get crop dust in that field?
You know, I just, so I try, and this was one place where I just really deviated. We were flying to Malone, and had to go past all these wind farms, and I'm just going farther and farther and farther off track. It's like, I don't want to fly over them. The other thing that I didn't like, and Brad, you remember this when we flew over Louisiana, was all the bayous in Louisiana, Mississippi, and it looks like trees. Well, it's trees, but it's nothing but water. Those trees are living in water. And there's gators down there. And even though I'm in a fully enclosed, you know, plane, still the idea of going down over these was another stomach puncher for me. Yeah, Dennis says, oh, well, and he wasn't referring to this, but he says, if we go down over water, we'll make sure we, just land close to a fishing boat, and they'll come and get you. It's like, yeah, right. I can just picture myself upside down, trying to open the door to get out before I drown. Anyway, so lots and lots of bayous that we went over, so much so that even though we planned to fly the whole perimeter, when we got to Florida, I said, I'm not doing the Everglades. I've had my fill of going over bayous filled with gators, and I'm just not going to do the Everglades, and so we didn't. We did cut short instead of going all the way to the tip. And the other thing is, there was a lot of area where we wanted to fly the coastline, but there really isn't a coastline in a lot of these areas. Florida, South Carolina, it's salt marshes, it's, and you look and you think, oh, I could land there, and then it's like, no, because it's just, you're sinking really deeply into muck and mire. So that was not super comfortable either. And as a matter of fact, I went inland. There were times that Dennis was out over these marshes, and I just said, to heck with this, and I just went inland. Found a road, followed the road, felt much more comfortable. And the worst, not the worst, for me, it was tiring. All that smelling, but I was tired all the time. And Dennis is one of these up at 5, see at 5 kind of people, and I said, no, we're not doing that again. We did that all the way back from Ohio. We parked the evening, and he'd say, see you at 5 in the morning, and we'd be up and out at 5, and we were flying 9, 10 hours a day. And I said, nope, not this trip. This trip, we'll do 2 legs, maybe 3, and I'm not starting until 8 o'clock in the morning. But still, I realized I couldn't have done this flight the way I did the Sun and Fun flight. Open cockpit, I just physically, I'm 15 years older, and it just would have been too much. So, any questions just about terrain, weather?
You were talking about flying low for a while, right? And so with typically, like if you're at home in Oregon, are you flying around at 500 feet most of the time?
Okay, so what she asked was, she said that I talked about flying low,
Yeah.
and she asked if at home I'm flying at 500 feet. When I'm flying in the Willamette Valley, or the coast, I'm often at 500 feet or even lower.
So being up that high, that's such a contrast.
So she says being up at that high at such a contrast. So actually, what's interesting is I often, if I'm flying we have the Columbia River Gorge that I follow to get to Eastern Oregon, and then I'm flying at maybe 4,000 feet. But there's not many places, other than when I fly south into California, I have to get up to about 8,000 feet to fly over the Siskiyou Mountains. But for the most part, I'm flying under 7,500 feet when I'm flying locally, within a day's a day's flight. And what was really interesting was there was one segment that I did coming across. It was after you'd left, when you'd already gone back to. So I was still up near Escanaba, and I don't remember why, but I was up at about, oh, I know, because there was clouds, and the clouds didn't look. They looked like the basins were at about, maybe 1,400 feet, but the tops weren't that high. I thought, and they were scattered. So I just started, I'll climb. Well, I climbed, and I got to 4,000, and then they were a little higher, so I climbed more, and then they were a little higher, and all of a sudden I'm up at 8,000 feet, and I realized I was at actually 7,000 feet AGL. I've never done that before. You know, usually I'm a couple of thousand feet AGL. And it was like, wow, this is really different. Really different. It was very cool. And there were lots of places to land, and so I wasn't worried about that, but I just didn't want to get down real low. So, getting gas. We used, as I said earlier, we used almost always avgas because we were landing at airports, and so we were getting, I think twice we were able to get MoGas. However, when we were flying to Florida, we were doing a lot of landing off field and taxiing up to, we didn't do any of that this flight, but this is something I'm pretty used to. And the other thing is when Randy and I were flying to Florida, this was before we met up with you when we were flying in Arizona. Every ranch in Nevada, Arizona has their own source of gasoline. And we would, in some cases, we would circle a town really, really, really slowly, and then we would land on a dirt road, and inevitably someone would come over and, to see these funny-looking, bright-colored planes and offer us a ride to get gas. In this case, we landed on a dirt road leading to a ranch, and they were doing were having a cow drive, and so the dad and the two kids came up, and they were so curious, and we asked them if they had access. We needed some gas, and because I've got 30 gallons now in my Aerocraft, but I was carrying, I think, 16 gallons when I was flying the Drifter, and they said, sure, just drive right up taxi right up the driveway, and we'll get you gas. So that was fun. And then the next thing is sleeping and eating. And I already mentioned that pretty much you sleep where you can find a place to sleep, and you eat where you can find a place to eat. So I've stayed in a lot of FBOs, And we landed on a Friday night in Petaluma, California, and it was 7:30, I think, and so the airport was deserted, but the FBO was open, and it was just a small FBO, and so Dennis pitched his tent out on the deck, and I dragged my air mattress and my sleeping bag inside, and went to sleep. At about 6:30, 6:45, I'm all of a sudden awakened by some guy shouting at me. Who the hell are you? What in the world are you doing here? How dare you be here? And I wake up, and he's videotaping me, and it's like, holy Toledo, just scared the so-and-so out of me. And he's just shouting, I'm calling the police, you get out of here right away. And it's like, okay, I'm sorry. And then I said, I've slept in a lot of FBOs, and I'm sorry, I'll get out of here, we'll get our planes, and we'll get out of here. And he said, you're what? I said, our planes, they're right out there. You could see them from the FBO. I said, the orange and the green one. Then he says, you're pilots? And I said, yeah. He thought we were homeless. They were having a really serious problem with the homeless. And he thought we were homeless. So, and then it was as nice as could be. And he said, go back to sleep. Don't worry. Not a problem. Wake up when you want. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh, what a shock. But that's the only time. Now, I did have, where was I? I was at, I had diverted because of weather. You had flown on, and you were already wherever you were. And it was getting socked in. I was flying over the clouds, and then they were scattered, everything was fine. Then it started getting, more and more clumping to where it was broken. I don't fly when it's broken. So I dived under and, landed in Grove City Airport.
She flew through a hole, guys. She flew through a hole.
Yeah, it was not what I wanted to do. And I was walking around, and there's no porta potties. Everything's locked up tight. And then some EAA guys they were having a chapter meeting. Nice as could be, fed me, and we had a really great time. And they said, "Oh, stay here in the FBO tonight." And I said, "Wonderful, thank you." Well, so I spread out my sleeping bag, and I'm sitting back in one of the recliners reading, and then my phone rings, and it's someone from the city. It's a municipal airport, and she says, "I see from our cameras that it looks like you're settling in for the night." And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Nope, can't do that. It's a municipal airport. Our liability doesn't allow for that." She said, "You'll have to stay outside." And it was hot, and it was like, oh, dang, but that's the only time. Usually, folks are really nice and never have had any trouble with staying in FBOs. Also, this is at a friend's hangar where often, and matter of fact, that's happened to us several times, where friends have had us put our planes into hangars, and we sleep sometimes in the hangar, sometimes in the friend's home. And in this case, this was in Roseburg, California, a good friend of mine, Oregon, good friend of mine, and he just said, "We're going to throw a party. And since you're going to spend the night here, we're just going to throw a party and call friends, and we all had a party." And then other times, we're moteling it, And this time, like I said, it was so hot that we moteled it a lot more than we had thought we would. And then in terms of food, I've discovered there's more Subways than there are McDonald's in small towns. I got to a point where I really didn't want to have another Subway sandwich. But my emergency stuff are M&M's, raisins, peanut butter, and crackers, Cheez-Its, and water. And I can do pretty well on that for quite a while.
I'll throw another one in there, beef jerky and shrimp. Those two are always good.
Yeah, that's your favorite.
That's mine too.
Yeah, for me, beef jerky is too salty. But the other thing, and I'm hoping you can read this. So this is so fascinating. So on the right, the Coca-Cola, look at this, fried Oreos and fried cheesecake burrito. I mean, unless you're traveling in the small towns, where would you ever find food like that, right? Matter of fact, Ronnie Smith in Mississippi introduced me to fried pickles. I've never heard of fried pickles. The other thing is, take a look at the prices.
Can you tell us?
That was current prices. I paid $3.50 for a grilled cheese sandwich. The prices, it was incredible. $3.50 for a hamburger. So, sometimes these small towns, you can eat really well.
She's from Portland, guys. I know. She couldn't believe the South.
So, lessons learned. One is, for me, you can fly around a rain set. That can work. The other is that 1-800-WX-BRIEF is for more than weather. So I like talking to someone. So I don't use their, even though I've got, the account, I don't use their website. I like to talk to someone so I can ask them questions. And when we were flying, there was a whole bunch in the South, a whole bunch of what are called alert areas. No, not alert areas, defense areas. And they didn't have a boundary. It just said defense area. And when you go into the regs, it's lumped in with the ADIZ, but they only talk about what that is. They don't talk about what is a defense area. What does that mean? So I didn't know what to do, and I called a friend of mine who's a DPE and said, "What does that mean?" And he said, call 1-800-WX-BRIEF, and they'll explain it to you. I didn't realize that they will give you any information they possibly can, not necessarily related to weather. And so I called them, and she said, "Don't worry about it, it's no big deal, we just like people to know that there's gonna be perhaps activity. It's not a MOA, but that was for me a real learning, that I can call WX Brief and get information that has nothing to do with weather. The other thing is that I discovered is I don't like flying by myself for days at a time. Now locally, I'm flying by myself most of the time because the other people at my airport, they basically are flying within 10, 15 miles of the airport. They're just not flying very much. And so I fly by myself most of the time. But when I'm flying by myself over strange territory for hours and hours and hours, it's just not fun. So I discovered that. And I also discovered that you can sightsee on the ground. Whenever I've flown somewhere, and you'll remember this, we just went where we were going. We didn't stop anywhere. And when we were on our way to Florida, Dennis said, we'll stop and we're gonna swim with the manatees. I said, really? He said, yep. He said, you need to experience that. And so we had a short flight in the morning, stopped, and again, it was somewhere in Florida, and we took a taxi into town. Dennis had signed us up for this swim with the manatees, had on our bathing suits, got our snorkeling equipment. It was amazing. It was like, oh, you don't have to just fly. When you're going somewhere, you can sightsee as well. And we did the same thing at Niagara Falls. He said, I want you to see Niagara Falls. And it was like, really? I did not bring my passport, never occurred to me to bring my passport. And Oregon doesn't yet have the enhanced driver's license. And couldn't go into couldn't go across the falls. But we stopped at the airport and, got a ride in town and went and saw Niagara Falls. I mean, I don't know, somehow that's just nothing I've ever done. With all the long distance flying I've done, I've never done any sightseeing along the way. So my statistics so far is that we left on Wednesday, June 14th. I flew in here on Sunday, July 15th. And so 30 days in flight, because there were 4 days that we didn't fly, and 102.5 flight hours. And what really delighted me, when you divide that into the number of gallons, I was getting 3.5 gallons, fuel burn to the hour. I was like, wow, I thought I was using a lot more than that. So that was really cool. And 19 sectionals. I had put out a call just for people to send me I listed the sectionals I needed, and I said, I just want outdated sectionals. Because all I care about is where are the airports. I can look up in the chart supplements about the airports. I can do that, but I just want to, as I plan my route, I kind of want to know. So it used 19 sections, all right? 19 of them. So to wrap it up, don't wait till your ducks are all in a row. Do it. Just, as Nike would say, just do it. If you wait till everything is perfectly aligned, it may never happen. And, above all, enjoy your flight.
I'll add some things there. I do this a lot too. It is one way.
Wait, okay, so hold on. And before you add, you have to know, Dennis really is amazing in terms of giving me information, but he talks. And I had to train him not to talk when I'm on fire. And at first I honestly thought that he didn't need to do the push to talk because he was talking on downwind. I said, Dennis, stop. And then he's talking when I'm on base, Dennis, stop. So I just thought, maybe he doesn't realize that he's talking to me. Maybe he's not, but he does have to push to talk. And finally I got him trained where he cannot say anything to me when I'm turning on to fire. But anyway, go ahead.
And sometimes it's okay to lie to them and don't give them the guts.
Yes, I know. Go ahead. Tell him what you did.
I encourage people to do it. It is one leg at a time. Your leg may change during that leg, but one leg at a time. Plan it, do it, but people need to change their plan. The thing is, just don't wait. I have John Hawk, if anybody knows John Hawk. He flew a cold to Alaska 3 times. And I I was in my fifties, he was already in his sixties, him and John Gilliam and I were all hanging out one day, and John said, I was just flying a cold ultra starter flying, and he said, look at these kind of ventures, don't wait, do them now. And he said, I'm 10 years older, and the stuff I did go last, I couldn't do that. So I moved up, got my license, got the call. I've been flying now with a pilot's license for 11 years, and got 3,400 hours.
Okay, so,
Fly for a risk tolerance, not somebody else, but fly, do the trips, find a way that works for you. Some guys, I just do 4 or 5 legs a day sometimes, but after 2 days of exhaustion. This trip, 2 legs a day, although I'd rather fly them first thing in the morning when it's cooler and colder.
so, and that's another interesting thing in terms of lessons learned. People always say, oh, you can't fly in the summer, during the day. We were flying all the time, it just didn't matter. So, comments, questions?
Do you feel that your competence as a pilot ebbs and flows and your risk tolerance, your personal minimums, depending on how much you're flying? Because you did that big trip to Southern Fun, when was that?
14 years ago.
Okay, and so you did a lot of valley flying, low flying, and some other trips like with Dennis with the Ohio thing. But do you find that when you're doing a lot of cross-country stuff, that your personal minimums change?
My personal minimums change, but it doesn't go up and down. It's just because I just feel I'm a more confident pilot, and so, I tell people, don't use, people will say to me, how windy is it, how bumpy is it? I say, don't use me, because I've gotten to a point where I really can tolerate a lot of turbulence, and I really know my plane, and so I know its limits, although I've never stretched its limits. I'm sure I could do much more. So, for me at least, I just hope, I've got several friends who grounded themselves because they were starting to make foolish mistakes. I just hope I can ground myself when I start making mistakes, before it's too late. But yeah, so I wouldn't say my tolerance ebbs and flows, it's definitely growing,
Everybody has different tolerance for things. And there's different planes that make it easier also. Throw my plug in here, the A22 she's flying, it's the best in the industry, being directionally stable, even with pretty heavy bird.
And there is an Aeroprat exhibitioners, they've got 3 of them up there. Other comments, other questions?
What about,
Talk a little bit more.
What, Dennis, hold on,
what about, insurance?
okay, insurance. So, I do not have any. And the reason I don't have any, because I wanted some, I've never had insurance, but I've never had a plane this expensive before. And the reason I wanted insurance, but when I was I had a weird thing. When I originally got my pilot certificate, it's a light sport certificate, and at the time I was flying the Drifter, and so I took my check ride in my Drifter with Brian Carter, some of you may know him, who was the DPE on the ground with the radio telling me what to do and watching me. So as a result, my pilot certificate had a limitation on it, that I could only fly a single seat aircraft. So I'd forgotten that. That was years ago. Who looks at their pilot certificate every day? So I buy a two-seat plane. Well, in order to get that limitation lifted, I needed to take another check ride. I needed to take another oral and another check ride. And it was really interesting because no one at FAA knew how to do that. It was in the regs that you could do that. You could get that limitation lifted, but no one seemed to know how to make that happen. So it was a little weird. Yeah. But anyway, so I was working with my CFI in order to get signed off to take my check ride, and I said to him, we're coming into land, and I said, I'm gonna go around, we're going too fast. He said, nope, and we hit a wind shear, and I went off the runway, didn't do much damage, but did a little bit of damage, and as a result, the VEMCO at least is not taking any applications if you've had any incident within the last 3 years. So So I've gotta wait till October of 24 before I can get insurance. So I'm gonna get it, but right now I don't have any insurance.
And the older you get, the much more expensive it gets, you may know.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, as a matter of fact, come December, I will be a full-fledged member of the United Flying Octogenarians. So, other comments, other questions?
Could you talk a little bit more about your airplane, why you chose that airplane? Do you ever think to step it up to a heavier night sport?
Sure. So, the fellows that I fly with have constantly stepped up their aircraft. And so they're now flying Highlanders and Avids and Carbon Cubs and stuff like that. And they've been amazingly generous waiting for me in my Talon, which cruises at like 70 miles an hour. And 2 years, about 2.5 years ago, they invited me to go to Stehekin for a barbecue for Memorial Day weekend. Now, Stehekin is the very north end of Lake Chelan, and it's 45 miles over water and forest. There's no roads that get there. You have to take a ferry. If you're not flying, you have to take a ferry. And I looked at that and I thought, you know, I've got a 582. Do I want to fly for 45 miles over water and forest? And I said to Dick, the fellow who invited me, I said, nah, that's just way out of my personal minimums. And he said to me, this was on a Thursday afternoon before Memorial Day, he said to me, Arty, you've got to get a better airplane because you're not going to be able to keep flying with us. And I hung up and I thought, he's right. I want to keep flying long distances. The people that I want to fly with don't want to keep waiting for me, you know? So, and like I think we agree it was 7 years before that, Dennis had been ferrying a plane, an aircraft, out to Oregon. He stayed with Normandy overnight and had given me a flight. And I remember way back then saying to him, if I ever go fully enclosed, this is the only plane I've ever been in that I can imagine owning. I've never wanted to fly fully enclosed. I've never wanted to fly tricycle gear. I've never cared about having a two-seat, you know. But if I ever do, this is the only plane that I want. And so that came to mind, and that was Thursday afternoon. Thursday, I went and looked on Barnstormers, talk about an impetuous decision. Went and looked on Barnstormers, found the plane, called Dennis to say, what do you know about the plane? What do you know about the owner, about his maintenance, and all that? Called the owner, said, I don't need any information from you whatsoever except how negotiable are you on the price? Because Dennis had spent an hour on the phone with me talking about that particular plane, that particular owner. Yeah, so by Friday, I'd made an offer on the plane. That's how that happened.
Oh, here's a question she kept asking me. Well, how slow can I fly? 10 minutes later, really, I just want to slow it.
Because I'm not interested in flying fast. I like low and slow.
Usually they ask you how fast.
Exactly. Everyone else wants to know how fast can this prop fly. I want to know how slowly can I fly.
One time how fast when there's weather you're trying to get away from.
That's true. That's true. Although I'll just put down if I can. Okay. Any other comments?
You got any advice for day trips from a local area? You say you like to go fly a day, just go for a day trip. All the time looking for somewhere to go to, not a long trip, just a short.
Yeah. See, so I have to tell you, so I've been flying, I soloed May of '89. I've been flying a long time, all out of the same airport. And for me, even 20 minutes in the air is a joy. You know, so I know people say they get bored of flying in the same area, and I just don't get bored. And so I've got my favorite places to go, but there's always new places, you know, even when for me at least, there's always new strips or, you know, oh, look at what's happening over here, look what's happening there. So, yeah. Yes.
The question
Wait, hold on, Dennis, hold on.
Have you ever had any engine outs?
Yes, I've had engine outs, and with one exception, it's always been my fault, in the sense that it's never, the road, so my very first Sunburst had a Cuyuna. I hated that plane. I had to get rid of it. No one could make the Cuyuna reliable. I had 3 engine outs with the Cuyuna, and always was able to land. Then I had a 503 and with the drifter, and never had a problem. Never, all the way to Sun and Fun and back, never hiccup. Once I forgot to put on the gas cap. I let someone else help me. Never do that again, you know. So lost the engine for that. You know, ran out of gas. But for once when I was coming back from Oshkosh, as a matter of fact, in my Talon, I refueled at Miles City, Montana, and then was following the Yellowstone River, and the engine died. Well, I was over lots of fields, lots and lots of fields. Tried starting it, started right up again, then it died again. So I thought, you know, I tried it a second time, it started up and it died, and I thought, okay, time to just land, fly the plane. And I have to admit, you know, they say that karma, I was feeling pretty smug. I was set up perfectly over a really big, beautiful field. What I didn't know was it was barley that was this high, just about to be harvested. And one second, I'm just about to touch down, just feeling so smug, and the next second I'm upside down, spitting barley out of my mouth. And that was a stator problem. I had a gray head, 582, and the stator just pooped out. So in that case, I ended up, I had a trailer at home. And so I rented a big Penske U-Haul and trailered at home. And then another time, and that was what was really interesting, that it was a learning experience for me. I was flying my drifter in Utah over Escalante Grand Staircase. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that area, but it's all rim rock and, you know, no place to land. And my engine died, and I was able to land it on one little stretch of straightaway. And then I was flying with Randy at the time, and we couldn't get it to replicate on the ground. And he said, well, we're only 30 miles from Black Rock, and, you know, we'll just go there and break it down. I said, oh, no way. I don't know why it died. I'm not going up again. So called a friend, as a matter of fact, our mutual friend BJ, and he brought a trailer out. Well, what we discovered was because of where my fuel pump was positioned, I didn't have an electric fuel pump. And because of where it was positioned, we were up at about 9,000 feet, because it's all really high elevations there, and the fuel pump just couldn't keep up. It was, you know, because of the air density, just could not keep up. So BJ put an electric fuel pump on and didn't have any problem. But, so yeah, I've had some engine outs, but happily, knock on wood, I've never been hurt. Anyone else?
Kudos to you for sticking to your personal minimums.
Oh.
That's cool. I remember when I first met you, joined up with you in Louisiana for the remainder of that trip, and I had not met you before. One of the first things you said to me, I'll never forget it, you're like, this is what we're going to do. You said, you're a big boy, I'm sure you can handle it. So you joined us there, meet us there, take your own route, whatever, but this is what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's cool. You can't have too many people making decisions on where to go. So you said, you do you, and I followed along, and that worked out good. But
yeah, and it's worked out really well, because in the air, there have been times, you know, on this flight, where I said to Dennis, nope, not doing that, see ya, you know, and he says, okay, see ya.
Yeah, that brought back a lot of memories of what you're saying from that trip back then. Not much has changed. And flying over the trees and the water, that's the ultralight, two-stroke ultralight pilot coming out at you. You still don't want to fly where you can't land.
Exactly.
Flies 4 strokes, he's the same way.
I know.
Motors make it quit. I don't care if it's 912, they can all quit. I've never had an engine out on a 912. I've followed them now for a long time.
Well,
I've had 7 engine outs in my career.
And I really want to trust the engine, but again, that ultralight, I mean, I've had a lot of years of flying 2 strokes.
And And our golden rule is you don't fly where you can't land.
Yep, that's
Back
right.
in those days, and you know, you kind of
That's
have
right.
to sometimes, but it does make you nervous.
Well, thank you all very much for coming. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed sharing this with you. And good flying.
Cool, thank you.